Welcome to my podcast, Why Get Wasted? Innovative Solutions to Climate Change. I'm so excited you found us. In this podcast, I'll be talking with really interesting people who've come up with innovative solutions for tackling climate change. There's so much fear and discouragement now, and I know we can all feel helpless to do anything about what we see and know is happening with our planet. But people are creative and resilient, and they can be really smart, and often in times of crisis, really step up to the plate. So I wanted to draw attention and talk further to some people who've come up with their own way to help all of us fight for our planet. And now a little bit about me. My name is Liz Entin, and I'm the founder of Why Get Wasted. We offer customized plans for businesses and events, both personal and professional, to help them be more climate friendly and sustainable. We've worked with everything from festivals and concerts to fashion shows, and even your kid's birthday party or your own dinner party. While doing this, I've just met some really inspiring people. And now I want to share their stories, the companies they've created, and the solutions they've come up with all of you. We can all work together to fix this. And now I hope you enjoy this episode of Why Get Wasted? Innovative Solutions to Climate Change. Hey everyone, today I am speaking with Reverend Dr. Jessica Hetherington, and we will be speaking about her incredible work with climate. Welcome, Reverend Jessica.
Hi, thank you, Liz. Thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast.
Well, thanks for coming on. So I'd love to, if you wouldn't mind telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what your role is and focus on climate is about at this point.
Okay. Well, so I'm an ordained minister in the United Church of Canada, and I'm an eco-theologian, which means that I have a PhD that focuses on how do we respond to the ecological crisis as people of faith. So I use that. I'm now an itinerant minister, meaning my exclusive ministry is on helping encourage, inspire people of faith to take climate action. And I do that through I have a weekly newsletter on Substack, called Faith Climate Crisis Action. And so I write on there weekly, offering support, encouragement, challenge, information. I also preach. I do public speaking. I do workshops. I also serve internationally with the World Council of Churches and the World Communion Reformed Churches. So I sit on climate justice commissions with these global church bodies, ecumenical bodies, to work on climate justice around the world.
And so your faith, it's a branch of Christianity, as far as I understand, correct?
Yes, that's right. I was raised Roman Catholic, and now I'm a Protestant minister I'm in a Protestant denomination.
And have you been targeting all faiths in your reach out? And if so, how has the response been?
That's a really great question. So my work, I'm a Christian, but I'm also a Christian theologian. So what that means is not only is my faith, the way I understand the world and my faith in God is through that lens of Christianity, following the stories of Jesus and that making sense in my life and helping me to make sense of the world. But I'm also trained in that area. So I'm trained in asking questions about the world and how we're supposed to respond out of that tradition. So in my work, that means that it's got that Christian lens. My work is directed primarily to people who identify with the Christian story, who call themselves Christians, but it doesn't have to be exclusive. I have lots of subscribers who come from a whole range of faith traditions, as well as none, people who aren't religious at all, who recognize that we need everybody at the table talking about climate action. We need to be coming from all of our perspectives. What matters is that we're taking action. And for me, as a Christian and as a Christian minister, what is really valuable is how we use our faith to help encourage us and give us that strength and give us sometimes that little bit of that kick in the butt that sometimes we need to take action. So yes, so I work in the Christian tradition. Primarily my audience is Christian, but it isn't exclusively.
How does your interpretation of Christianity make you so motivated to care about climate? How do the two tie in?
So ever since I was a child, I've always been passionate about both social justice and environmental issues. This just got stronger as I got older and as I explored my faith. And I've always cared about the natural world and always seen myself as a part of the natural world. And my understanding of Christianity is that we are called to act for justice, mercy, compassion, that we are all part of God's creation. The natural world in Christianity, we talk about God's creation. And so my understanding and in my studies, as well as in my faith life and community, has been very much that we are called to take action to help others, to help the planet, and that we are a part of all of it. So that has been what really, really drives me. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking like it's just intellectual, but it's very much a passion for me as well. When I worked on my graduate studies, I had become a mom a little over 20 years ago, and these issues became even more important to me. It's like you can't avoid it. It's in your home. What kind of world are we going to leave for our children, and how are we responsible? And when I worked on my studies, I was really transformed from it being even deeper, a sense of commitment, a sense of discipleship, a sense of this is how I need to follow God, is to take responsibility for the climate crisis in the ways that I can, and to take climate action and to encourage others to take climate action. For me, faith and climate action are like interconnected. I can't separate them out for myself.
I love that approach to faith and the interpretation of it. Where you said you live in Canada, you were saying?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I'm in Ontario. So yeah.
Okay.
Eastern Canada.
Yeah. Is this typical, or is there a lot more discussion and movement towards caring about climate in faith? I guess I assume you can't speak for all faith communities. So in Christianity, or the divisions of Christianity that or as much as if you know about other faiths as well, is this something that's becoming a common concern in people of faith?
Absolutely. I mean, religious traditions are very diverse, not just from each other, but within them, right? And so you're going to have people across the board, just like we do in general society. Some people are really passionate, are out there doing stuff every day. Others would rather not know about it. So it's like that. But I would say, in my experience, now I work also ecumenically, what ecumenically means, like different Christian traditions and internationally, right? Like I sit on a climate justice commission with the World Council of Churches. That's 30 church leaders from around the world representing hundreds of millions of Christians. And so I would say that it's very much a concern for many people of faith. The climate crisis is very much a concern. How that gets lived out is as diverse as the rest, as our individual circumstances. But I would say that there is a concern and a care for what is happening with the climate crisis and our responsibility as human beings to work for reducing global heating, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera, and seeing that as a moral issue, seeing that as a faith issue, as well as a political issue, a family issue, et cetera. So I would say that for the most part, yes, there's quite a bit of concern for it.
And I'm just curious, from what I understand, part of your job and responsibilities and calling, probably more likely as a reverend, is speaking with individual people and easing their concerns. Is climate a huge concern among something you have to help comfort or speak with your congregation about? Are they very scared right now?
Yes. I mean, I'm not in one congregation. I get invited to go and speak and preach specifically on this topic. So there's a bit of a niche there for me. But definitely, I would say that there's deep concern and worry. There's overwhelm, a sense of helplessness. Also depends on what ages we're talking about. In traditional church congregations, meaning inside sort of on Sunday mornings, often it's older people, and they're deeply worried about the mess that the Earth is in and what kind of future their grandchildren, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren are facing. And then among the youth, there's very much a very high level of climate anxiety and very aware, you can't pull the wool over the eyes of youth. And I have my kids range in age from 8 to 22. So I've seen, they're the smartest, not just my kids. Most kids are pretty smart about these issues. What I see is there tends to be a sense of overwhelm and helplessness. I'm going to speak mostly about older people, like meaning my age and up, who are the ones I've been mostly speaking to. And there's that sense of overwhelm and helplessness that then tends to keep us from taking the radical climate action we need to. And when I say radical, I mean, we have to change everything about the way we live our regular lives, consumption, high levels of consumption, the way we get around our energy use and just using less. And that's really overwhelming. And so what I find is really helpful is to talk about it for people of faith. And again, for others, there's other ways to talk about it. But for people of faith, talking about it in terms of recognizing we can't do it all on our own individually, but that we can do stuff in community, and that we can take action in community and we can support each other, helps to take away some of that sense of helplessness, some of that sense of loneliness or isolation, and can help to bring back a sense of hope. And I don't mean hope like, everything's going to be fine in the end, because that's not really hope. Hope is more taking action because something is right and good and is the right thing to do, which can be quite profound. So that's how I try to handle it and how I try to speak to people. In August, I was in Kenya doing some work with the World Council of Churches. And when I came back, I was asked to preach at a church about my experiences. And I talked about the power of the young adults in Kenya who've been protesting, nonviolently protesting about economic and ecological justice in their country. And someone came up to me, she was a woman in her 70s, and she said, "Reverend Jessica, you have inspired me to start going to protests." And what had happened was she had felt like she could, like, what was she going to do? There's limits to what we can do individually. But they inspired her and was like, if they can do it, I can do it too. And of course, here where I live, we have like the climate march in September, and we have other activities. And so just that sense of like, okay, yes, we can do this if we do this together, and this can be a part of my faith. And key in Christian thought is that, we can do so much more than we ever thought we could when we do it from a place of faith. So, yeah.
That's all pretty inspiring.
Thank you.
It feels a little more hopeful because, obviously I'm hopeful, or I wouldn't be working in climate, but, we have to all
That's right.
really pull together. Yeah.
Yes.
And now, to what extent in the Christian faith is climate becoming a priority across the board? Because I think certainly depends what country, which group. Some have, it really depends who you speak to about what the priorities are. And my personal take is some are very, very wonderful and helpful, and some are maybe the opposite of helpful, so what direction do you feel the majority of Christianity is moving, or is it sort of almost a battle within Christianity, just like everything else in the world? I hope I'm asking this clearly. Yeah.
You are. I think I know what you're getting at. There can be very much a polarizing thing within Christianity, and I see that in North America quite a bit, especially in the US, in your context of sort of making it a wedge issue or a theological issue. But really on the ground, well, most mainline churches are very much have taken a position to say that climate change is real, that we are everybody needs to take action. We need to be responsible. Especially the United Church of Canada has been very strong on that. So is the Anglican Church, like the mainline churches. And as I said, the World Council of Churches has taken a very strong position on this. And what I find my experience has been is that even regardless of which denomination you're a part of and what theology they might have about, humans within the natural world, et cetera, is that there's people on the ground doing really amazing climate work. And, so you've got evangelical, climate evangelicals, right? Where they're in the evangelical Christian tradition and they're doing really amazing climate work alongside folks who would have really different theology, who are, more left in terms of their denomination. And so I think that's what's really exciting. And that's that's happening. I mean, I've been careful to speak just about Christianity because I'm just a Christian. I'm not also a Buddhist or anything else, but this is pretty much across the board, that there are folks working out of their religious traditions across the board saying this matters. This is a moral issue. The climate crisis is a moral issue. It's overly impacting, the global South, folks in the global South who are being disproportionately impacted by the high consumption lifestyles of those of us primarily in the global North, et cetera. So recognizing the need to take action and to respond is pretty much across the board. And so I find it most helpful to really focus on who's doing the work and just, like Catherine Hayhoe has a book called Saving Us. She's a climate scientist and an evangelical Christian. She's in the US, but she's Canadian. And she talks about, in her book, Saving Us, about, there's a very tiny percentage of people whose minds you will not change. No point in trying to change their minds. It's more like finding the people who are concerned and how do we engage in that conversation and help to encourage more action. And that's sort of what I do, right? I'm like, if you want to hear about this, I can really encourage you and inspire you to take action and to make you realize you're not alone. And that's probably one of the most important things, is to not feel like we're alone, because it can be really difficult. All of us have climate anxiety. If we don't, we're not paying attention, right? So, but we can manage it better if we're doing it together.
I know this is a complicated, kind of confusing one, but I'm assuming as a Reverend, you kind of have another layer of insight into humanity and the human experience, the way maybe a psychologist would too. What do you think about climate denial? Do you have any thoughts on that? I know I've heard psychologists' viewpoints on that, but I'd be very curious what your thoughts are as a Reverend, what that is about.
That's a really great question. I've never been asked that before. I'm in a denomination where we don't deal with a whole lot of that. I guess if I were asked about it, well, you're asking me about it, I would say is to look at what I would probably try to reframe the question in terms of what matters to you. Is it your children? Then let's talk about what the future holds for them. Is it you love the land you live, where you live is where you were born and raised? What are the impacts happening? And then maybe trying to get at some of the fear that's underlying. There's always a point where you kind of just have to, if someone's not willing to listen or to hear it, you kind of back off. Hard for me sometimes, right? Because I'm a preacher. I just want to preach this stuff. But to back off and say, okay, you know what? In the meantime, there's a whole lot of people who are doing the work and who are trying to move things forward and move, adjust the needle, move the needle, the phrase is, and to put focus there. But certainly, as one trained to walk with people, as a pastor, that's what I'm trained to do. And as a climate chaplain, is to say, hey, what's going on there? Do you want to talk about that? And invite sometimes people will be open to speaking with me just because I'm a pastor. Sometimes they're not, but to be ready to have those conversations. Absolutely. Yeah.
And you've been able to change people's minds and make them able to see what's going on, or more than the average person can. I got one woman to start going to, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know, because people are often very polite and I don't hear a whole lot of the negative. My hope and my prayer is that when people read my work, hear me preach or hear me speak, that even if there's something that they're like, oh, I don't want to hear about that. I get that on the news. I don't need that on Sunday morning. That is a complaint actually that was made once, was that they still would hear something else in it that would start to speak to their heart and help to unlock something. And it may not happen yet. It could be a year later and they could go, oh,
I remember what Reverend Jessica was saying about that. Yeah. So hopefully it helps.
Now, I know so many people also not in denial, but they just feel so overwhelmed. They feel paralyzed. And just like there's so much to do and it's so big that they feel they can do nothing. What is just a doable tip that the average person can do in their busy paying the bills, running around life?
Yeah, great question. Yeah. And I mean, and I'm a parent with kids at home and a busy life, and so I totally get it. What was really helpful for me personally was okay, so this is going to sound, bear with me, Liz, okay? So the first part of this is that no amount of our individual actions are going to solve the problem. No amount of recycling or going plant-based or all that is going to do it on its own. We need the political shifts. We need to cut out fossil fuel emissions. We need political change, right? We need policy and legislation so that we can live in a different way, right? We need, for example, I was listening to some of your other podcasts, which are amazing. And it's recognizing, for example, we need like single-use plastics to be phased out completely. We can't do that individually because there aren't alternatives sometimes, right? So that's an example of where it has to be done at a higher level than we can do. Now, that might seem like, okay, well, that's just made it worse. But no, where that stuff is important, that we do the individual things we can, is because it really empowers us. Because the biggest problem, part of the reason why we feel paralyzed and we feel overwhelmed and maybe even leads to the climate denial, is when our actions don't match our beliefs. When we want to have a healthy planet for our children, and then we come home and we've just driven our gas fuel car and we've just done this and we can't afford to replace it, right? That contradiction is what causes so much of that struggle. But when we realize that, okay, I'm going to do the pieces I can that will empower me, make me feel like I'm living out my values, and then use that as an energy, like as an engine to then help do the social and the political stuff we have to do. That's where I think can be really helpful. So your question was, what are some suggestions? Like my husband and I have gotten a lot more plant-based. We're not vegan, but we've cut down on like like on our red meat, the highest that have a negative climate impact. And that just makes us feel like at the dinner table and with our kids, we are choosing to make a choice that's healthier for the planet, healthier for us, and makes us feel empowered. So then that gives us the energy to then write letters to our elected officials, to go to the climate march. So it could be, I take my jars to the bulk food store, reducing plastics. I reduce how much I don't buy clothing very often, and I take care of what I have. And so those are so someone can look and go, okay, what is the thing I can do? And recognize that although that in itself is one tiny piece, but that it can really be that driver, that engine to give us the power and the momentum to do the bigger pieces that we have to do together as a community. That's also why I like to speak to communities of faith, because, usually, it's a community, right? They get together once a week, maybe on Sundays, and together they might go, okay, maybe we'll do a clothing drive, or we'll work on putting solar panels on the roof of the church to reduce our electricity costs, and to reduce the fossil fuel emissions of natural gas, for example. So that's kind of my answer to that. I don't know how clearly I said that, but I really think that we use the individual piece to help us be the energy for the driver for the wider piece that we need to do.
I love the idea that you mentioned community too, because that's one thing I've noticed, in communities of faith, it's done so well. And I'm a little bit like spiritual, but I'm not of any faith. And I'm just like, I feel everybody should have the types of communities that people of faith are doing. That's another problem I'm trying to figure out for myself.
Well, that's a really good point, Liz, because and even in churches, right? Like church numbers have dropped by like so many, even in the last 20, 30 years. And so it's also a question of like, how do we build community in this time? And it can be, it could be your literal community. Hey, maybe like a piece of climate action could be getting to literally know your next door neighbor and saying, hey, do you want to just like share a lawnmower? Or like, come and borrow mine if you need, like, or hey, have you noticed that there's this event going on? The climate march is happening in September. Do you want to go with me? And just building community. Historically, religions are good at it. Sometimes we're struggling just as much as any other community, but I think that's a really good point, is how do we build community, not necessarily around religious lines, but more generally, how can we come together, whether it's as parents, as literally neighbors in a certain area of the city.
Obviously, your expertise, one of them is really talking to people and, getting points across. And I'm sure your position as well adds some respect to what you say and value to what you say. What can the average person do? And how can the average person, who people are not really necessarily coming to talk about advice for life, help motivate just their people around them about climate without, I know there's some ways where people can come off as holier than thou and off-putting, and some of us in the climate world can do that, and
I'm partly laughing because when people, I'm partly laughing because when people see me, the joke is this is a dog collar, my clergy collar, and people assume I'm like somehow better. I'm like, no, I'm not. Right. Yeah, I think being just saying, hey, like I think talking about how we struggle too. Like I drive I don't have an electric car, can't afford to buy one. So I'm taking care of the one, we went down to one car and we're taking care of it till it, as long as it can live. That's where prayer comes in handy. But, none of us are perfect. And so really, I think focusing on that and just being like, what are the pieces you can do? How can I support you in that? How can you support me? So like Liz, you're doing this work around climate. I'm doing this work around climate. We can support each other. Like people will say to me, Reverend Jessica, how can I help? I'm like, you can pray for me and pray for this ministry. You can pray for I've got people who are in their 90s, like literally in their 90s. And they'll be like, oh, my marching days are over, Reverend Jessica. And I'm like, absolutely. But can you donate money? Can you pray? Can you just offer that? Can you tell your grandkids that you're doing these things, to support them? I just think that there's ways that we just got to recognize there's no one right way to do things. And all of us need all the help that we can get. And I think if we do it from that humble way of just, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, whatever metaphor we want to use, that could be really helpful.
Lastly, I know depending where you live, if you care about climate, there's probably been a lot of scary setbacks in the past few weeks. And and I think a lot of us here are feeling scared about a lot of things. I mean, it depends where you live, but certainly, climate is one of the things I think we're feeling very frightened of in the US. And I think that's probably gone globally because, that's one of the beautiful things about things like climate, one of the horrifying. We all have to really work together. It doesn't, what we do affects China. And there's something so beautiful about that, but it's also really frightening when, people who have inordinate amount of power might not have any level of responsibility for making the world a better place. Are you feeling positive that despite setbacks, we're going to be moving in the right direction and in time?
So this is where I think I'll come back to that word hope. People say to me, actually, it's funny because in the last couple of months, I've had 3 different invitations to speak about, could you just give a hopeful word about this? Can you give us a word of hope? And I think it's really important to realize that it isn't about dismissing how serious it is or how bad it is. It's about acting anyways. And, there's an environmental educator named David Orr who says hope is a verb with its shirt sleeves rolled up. So it's action. And I think it's just a matter of taking action and recognizing that we take the action because it's right and good to do. And the outcome is ultimately out of our hands. What we have seen in history, we have seen transformations happen when people have gone out and done the work and have put one foot in front of the other and done the hard stuff and done more than they ever thought they could. I mean, that's the thing, right? The climate action we ultimately have to take is going to be really hard and also really transformative. And they didn't know that was going to happen. And I don't just mean within the climate field, but like think of some of our major, Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day, Gandhi, who really advocated for a nonviolent transformation of society and didn't live to see everything that was possible out of what they did. So we really, that is what hope is. Hope is about acting in the face of everything and knowing that something more can happen. And this is the thing, we talked about, I also speak to non-religious groups. And things like hope, there's very much a sense of it in Christianity, but that's a value or a belief that is across the board. That one, the value of the natural world, the idea that this is a moral issue, right? So that, I think, if we can really act in hope, it doesn't matter whether we're feeling hopeful, because emotions come and go. It depends on the day, right? But either way, whether we're feeling it or not, we need to act in hope. And that is if there's one message I leave people with, if you ask me the question, people feeling paralyzed, what are some simple things they can do? Act in hope, whatever it is, whether you're feeling particularly hopeful or not. And that is more important now than ever, given what we're talking about geopolitically in the world and the risks to climate right now. So I hope that's helpful. I didn't come on here to preach, Liz, but there's your little mini sermon for today.
Oh my God. I think the world needs it. I can't tell you how much I need everything you just said. And I assume most of our listeners do too. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate it. And I value what you're doing.
And I value what you're doing. So, I think that's the perfect way to end the podcast. I can't think of anything better.
Good.
Unless there's something else. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like me to ask you, or?
No, I don't think so. You had asked me just in the notes when we prepared, like when you emailed me and asked me if I would come on, you asked me what it meant to be a climate chaplain. And that's a phrase, that's a term I coined. I kind of made that one up. And it's that idea of accompanying chaplains. It's a word that people often know, even if they're not religious, like in a hospital or in the military. And it's that idea that we accompany people when they're going through something. And so what I try to say is that I can't lead you out of the climate crisis, but I can walk with you through it. And I think that's what people really need, regardless of their faith, whether they have one or not, is people walking together through the climate crisis, because no one is escaping it, but we can walk with each other through it. And that's what's really important to me.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate this.
Thanks, Liz.
So very lastly, where can our listeners find you, follow you, reach out, help?
I'm on Facebook and Instagram, Jessica Hetherington. And then also, especially my newsletter, which you find on Substack. It's jessicahetherington.substack.com. I imagine you'll put the link in the show notes. And it's called Faith, Climate Crisis Action. Very simple title, nothing poetic there. Faith, Climate Crisis Action. And so if people Google that, they'll find it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Why Get Wasted? Innovative Solutions to Climate Change. There are so many interesting people doing such great things in the climate space, and I'm really excited to bring them to you. They've inspired me so much, and I hope they inspire you too. So please come visit me and learn more at whygetwasted.com.